The convent bells rang out one last time that evening. Up in the hills of Thessaly, where the olive trees trembled under the autumn wind, we gathered inside our crumbling chapel, just a handful of nuns left. We prayed beneath faded frescoes of saints whose faces had long been worn away by age and grief. Out on the horizon, I saw the glow of fire. The red flags of the Ottomans were already waving, flickering like sparks against the dark mountains. We knew exactly what that meant. No riders were coming to warn us. No soldiers were left to defend us. Only the heavy stillness that comes right before conquest. Our abbess, Sister Eleni of Larissa, stood before the altar holding a silver crucifix that had somehow survived a century of storms. Her voice was low but steady as she said, "If they breach our walls, keep your vows within your hearts. They can't take that from you." But she was wrong. When the empire's armies finally reached our gates, vows and prayers didn't stand a chance against what history was determined to erase. If you're into real accounts from the Ottoman, Byzantine frontier, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us uncover more stories like this one, hidden away in missionary letters and old Vatican records. Now back to the story. Before sundown, the first stones of the convent gave way. The hymns that once echoed through those halls were drowned out by the clash of iron and the sound of screams. The Ottomans didn't waste arrows on holy ground. They shattered our gates with cannon fire, both a warning and a declaration. To them, a convent wasn't sacred. It was defiance itself, proof that the cross still dared to stand on conquered soil. Inside, we hid what we could: silver chalices, embroidered icons, tiny relics and fragments of saints' bones, all tucked beneath the chapel floor. We believed that even if our bodies were lost, maybe our faith would endure. But the soldiers weren't after treasure. They wanted proof, evidence that they had destroyed not just our armies but our God. By nightfall, the survivors were dragged into the courtyard. The torches threw gold and shadow across our white robes as we were told we'd be taken before the Pasha. A promise few ever lived to see. What happened next became legend, a story so dark even church scribes avoided the details. By dawn, the convent was nothing but ash. Smoke drifted from the refectory where we once shared bread and silence. Ottoman banners now flew from the bell tower, signaling to nearby units that resistance was over. But then, something unexpected happened. The soldiers waited for cries. Instead, they heard singing. Bound by rope, we began to chant Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Our voices shook, but they didn't break. The Ottoman captain, unsure whether to laugh or be angered, ordered Sister Eleni forward. She still clutched that same silver cross from the altar. He promised her mercy, said that if she renounced her God and accepted their faith, her sisters would live. Her answer sealed her fate. "I have already given my life," she said quietly. "What else can you take?" For a moment, the captain hesitated, maybe even felt something. Then he turned away and left her to his men. What followed was never fully recorded. Even Ottoman reports, which bragged of their victories, only called it discipline for those who refused reason. Yet years later, her name resurfaced: Eleni of Larissa, the nun who would not kneel. By midday, the convent's bells were melted into coin, and the cross from the roof shipped east as a trophy. But stories spread quickly across the villages. They said that when the wind swept through the ruins at night, you could still hear women's voices, not weeping but praying. The smoke hadn't even cleared when the march began. What remained of us, 22 women in torn habits, were driven south toward the coast, ankles tied, watched by Ottoman horsemen. To the empire, we weren't prisoners. We were proof that even sacred walls could fall. The road burned beneath the sun. The journey showed no mercy. We had never gone beyond the convent walls before that march. The road broke us down. Thirst, heat, and exhaustion clung to every step. When one sister stumbled, another lifted her veil so the soldiers wouldn't crush it beneath their boots. A small act of dignity in a world that had forgotten mercy. Our abbess was gone, but her last words stayed alive among us. "If you can't hold the cross, hold each other." After 7 endless days on the road, we reached the port of Volos. Waiting there were Ottoman galleys, not ships built for comfort but for control. We were herded aboard like cattle, wrists chained to wooden benches where thieves and slaves once rode. When the sails filled with wind, the shores of Greece slowly disappeared behind us. With them went everything we had ever known. The ship's overseer, Yusuf Aga, was a man obsessed with order. He kept perfect records, lists of spices, coins, textiles, and us, religious captives. Centuries later, that same ledger was found in the archives of Istanbul. The proof that our story wasn't just rumor or legend. The voyage to Constantinople took 12 long days. Storms battered the deck. Salt burned our wounds. Hunger hollowed out our faces. But it wasn't the pain that broke us. It was the silence. No one spoke to us except to shout orders. We existed like ghosts, suspended between sea and sky. At night, the youngest among us, Sister Magdalena, whispered psalms under her breath. Her voice was so faint it barely rose above the crash of the waves. But even the other chained captives, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, turned to listen. For a heartbeat, the sea seemed to hold its breath. When we finally entered the Bosphorus, the skyline of Constantinople rose before us. Domes and minarets glowing like blades of light in the dawn. The city looked alive, pulsing with power. For centuries, they'd called it the city of the world's desire. For us, it would become a cage. From the docks, they marched us through the narrow streets, past rows of merchants, soldiers, and slaves. People stopped to stare. Christian nuns among captives, even in an empire built on conquest, was something rare. We were led past the ancient Blacherney walls toward the imperial quarter, where our fates would be sealed. In the shadow of Hagia Sophia, once the grand cathedral of Christendom, they forced us to kneel. As the muezzin's call echoed from the minarets, one sister whispered, "We are home, but it is no longer ours." Before sunrise, they brought us into a marble courtyard surrounded by towering columns. It wasn't a dungeon. It was the Divanai Humayun, the imperial council chamber where the sultan's will was absolute. Here, captives weren't judged by kings or priests, but by the empire itself. For us, the nuns of Thessaly, faith was about to be weighed against conquest. At the center of the hall sat the Grand Vizier, his face carved from stone. To his left, a line of scribes waited with ink and parchment, ready to record every detail. Names, ages, even what we'd be used for. Every word they wrote still exists somewhere, pressed into paper darkened by wax and centuries. We stood there in our torn habits, eyes lowered. Through the interpreters, we were told the Sultan had offered mercy, but only one kind. Those who agreed to convert would get new names, food, and life within the palace. Those who refused would face what they called the discipline of faith, a phrase that could mean prison or simply disappearing forever. No one spoke. I saw Sister Magdalena tremble. She'd seen what happened to others, Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, all swallowed by the empire's silence. Before the guards could seize her, one of our elders, Sister Damaris, stepped forward. Her voice carried the calm of someone who'd lived long enough to watch empires rise and crumble. "My lord," she said to the vizier, "you may rename us, but you cannot rewrite the prayers we carry." The interpreter froze, uncertain if he should even repeat those words. When he finally did, the Grand Vizier's face didn't change. His voice came back cold and measured. "Prayers fade when the tongue forgets how to speak them." With a wave of his hand, our fate was sealed. Not death, not yet, but confinement. We were sent below, to the lower chambers of Topkapi Palace, where captives without rank or title were kept. Some called that mercy. Later, others would call it something far worse. Our new prison was unlike any dungeon I'd imagined. Beneath the palace gardens stretched a maze of stone halls, sealed from sunlight. Each room had a slit in the wall so narrow that light barely found its way in. You couldn't tell day from night, only the slow passing of time in shadows. They stripped us of our habits and gave us coarse clothes, the garments of servants. From that day forward, we were told we would work. Scrub floors, sew linens, stoke fires for the rooms above us. It was meant to humiliate us, to grind holiness down into obedience. But the Ottomans misunderstood who we were. We were women who had already vowed silence and denial long before captivity. Hunger, cold, isolation. These were not punishments to us. They were familiar companions. Our suffering wasn't destruction. It was devotion made real. Down in that dim prison, our discipline became our armor. At night, we prayed in whispers. One sister scratched a cross into the clay wall with her fingernail. Another traced psalms into the dust beneath her straw bed. We began marking time by the muezzin's calls from above. Not because we were converted, but as our own clock, a way to measure endurance, a reminder that faith was still alive somewhere inside us. Word of us began to spread through the servants' quarters. They started calling us the Silent Sisters, foreign women buried beneath the palace who never begged, never spoke. Some thought we were cursed. Others said we were saints. Either way, our silence carried through those tunnels louder than prayer. Days blurred into months. Our hands cracked and blistered from endless work. Washing linens, polishing brass, tending fires that warmed others but left us shivering. Our names were forbidden. Each of us was given a number, a mark of ownership. The empire believed that time and hunger would bend even the hardest faith. That's when the next stage began, a test disguised as kindness. At first came the small mercies. Food, oil, and soft fabrics sent to our quarters. Gentle men from the palace came speaking softly, promising peace, comfort, even freedom. Your God and ours are not enemies, one imam said. Take our tongue, and you will be free. But we understood what he meant. Freedom bought at the price of forgetting who we were wasn't freedom at all. To forget was the one sin we couldn't commit. It was then that Sister Magdalena, once the frail, trembling one, rose to lead us. She began whispering scraps of scripture she remembered from our convent, fragments half forgotten but reshaped into living prayers. Even broken, the word endured. When persuasion failed, kindness vanished. The torches went dark. Our food was halved. The visitors stopped coming. Only silence and hunger remained. Then they began taking us one by one. Each sister was led to a small chamber where scribes waited. We were told to repeat a single phrase of submission. Those who obeyed would live within the palace. Those who refused simply disappeared. It wasn't one grand act of cruelty, but something slower, a patient breaking of the soul. Faith wasn't ripped away. It was chipped off piece by piece through hunger, fear, and that quiet whisper that said, "Why suffer for a God who doesn't answer?" A few gave in. 2 sisters from Corfu, twins, finally whispered the words. They were dressed in silk and taken away, never seen again. For the rest of us, every disappearance made our faith harder, sharper. Sister Damaris, who had once stood tall before the vizier, grew pale and thin. When the guards demanded her name, she only smiled and said, "Call me Silence." Her defiance spread like a spark in dry straw. From that moment on, none of us spoke to our captors again. When they questioned us, we answered only with silence. And in that silence, we took back what the empire thought it had stolen, control. Official records barely mentioned us at all. Foreign captives, unresponsive, unproductive. To the Ottomans, we were failed conversions. But to history, we became something else. Proof that faith can live where walls crumble and chains rust. By the time spring returned to the palace gardens above us, only 11 of the original 22 still breathed. The guards called us ghosts in rags. But among the servants, whispers grew. They said that deep in the night, voices rose from under the palace. Faint, eerie chants in a language long forgotten but still feared. It was the same hymn we'd sung when our convent burned. And in those hidden corridors, buried in dust and stone, we found something miraculous. A sealed archway, lost to time. First, it was just a hiding place. Then it became a sanctuary. We used shards of broken pottery as candle holders, a scrap of linen as an altar cloth. From a piece of shattered mirror, we shaped a small, rough cross. Night after night, once the palace above had gone quiet, we gathered there. Not to sing, not to preach, but to remember. Each woman knelt and shared something small. A sound, a scent, a memory. The ring of a church bell, the warmth of bread before dawn. Those memories became our psalms, our offerings to a God who still listened in the dark. Years later, a Venetian prisoner wrote of strange voices echoing beneath the harem, women singing in Latin to a foreign god. Historians dismissed it as superstition, until, centuries later, archaeologists uncovered a small chamber beneath Topkapi's ruins. On its walls were carvings of crosses and a half-erased Latin phrase. Lux in tenebris lucet, the light shines in the darkness. That discovery changed everything. Proved those women hadn't vanished at all. They had left their defiance etched in stone. Inside that hidden chapel, Sister Magdalena, once fragile and afraid, became the heart of our faith. She marked the walls with charcoal, not names, but symbols. A bird for every sister still alive. A small flame for each one lost. When no new birds appeared, we knew another had gone. The guards never found the chapel, but they noticed something shift in us. Despite the hunger, the cold, and the endless labor, we carried ourselves with a strange calm. The overseers called it madness. The scribes who watched us wrote something else entirely, that we had found a strength not of this world. Our secret worship lasted months, maybe years. The empire tried to erase us, but the chapel became our final act of rebellion. Not with swords or speeches, but through faith that refused to die. By the time a new sultan rose to power, only a handful of us remained, worn down, gray, nearly forgotten. Yet beneath the palace our little chapel endured. Silent, hidden, eternal. Centuries later, when archaeologists dug through the layers of marble and empire, they found us. Not our bodies, but the marks we left behind. Women who had prayed in darkness, leaving the one thing no conqueror could ever claim: faith carved into stone. By 1482, the palace had changed hands again. A young, ambitious sultan took the throne, vowing to purge every trace of weakness from the past. Every servant, concubine, and worker was carefully listed except one group. In the Topkapi archives, under neat columns of names, there's a blank space, a gap where 21 entries should have been. The ledger reads simply, removed, unfit for service, disposed. No dates, no graves, just silence. That's how history erased them, not with fire, but with missing ink. Yet even that silence became proof, because only something shameful is hidden that carefully. Centuries later, a diary from an Ottoman courtier surfaced in Bursa. It spoke cryptically of foreign women who refused to submit and vanished beneath the palace floors. Around the same time, a Venetian spy intercepted a letter mentioning nuns who would not bow to the Sultan's will. Piece by piece, those fragments told the truth. The empire hadn't forgotten us. It had tried to bury us. The last trace of Sister Magdalena appears decades later, in the writings of an Italian pilgrim. He told of a palace servant who sang to her God until the guards sealed her in a stone room. Her name was never known, but the hymn she sang lingered, carved into the walls themselves. Over the years, the story of the vanished sisters became legend. Servants and slaves whispered that on full moon nights, the lower halls grew cold and smelled faintly of incense, though no fires burned. Memory, superstition, maybe both, but the story never died. By the early 1700s, European diplomats visiting the Ottoman court heard echoes of the same tale. One Frenchman wrote in 1712 that among the oldest attendants lingered a forbidden story of Christian women who had sung themselves into heaven. He dismissed it as a myth, but the walls had already told the truth. The chapel lies in ruins now, its stones cracked and worn, but the carvings remain. Faded prayers, scratched crosses, the whisper of women who refuse to be forgotten. In their silence, they still speak. And if you've heard their story tonight, let it stay with you. Tell someone what you felt when you learned what they endured. And if you want to uncover more truths buried in history's shadows, stay with us. Subscribe. Step deeper into the darkness. Because some truths are meant to be remembered, no matter how much they hurt.